From Illinois Public Media, this is the 21st Show. I'm Brian Mackey. There's been ongoing debate as to how schools, teachers, and administrators should approach student discipline. Gone are the days that teachers used to be able to hit students, what was known as corporal punishment. But even so, many teachers today would tell you that today's students are rowdier, more disruptive, and overall just not following the rules. And that's led to other forms of discipline, suspensions in particular, whether that be in school or out of school. But across the country, who is getting disciplined is disproportionately to who is actually a student. So, according to data from the U.S. Department of Education, preschool boys who are black accounted for 9% of enrollment, but 30% of out-of-school suspensions. Again, that's preschoolers. And this brings us to Illinois, where two schools in particular discipline black students at much higher rates than any others in the state. Kennedy Middle School in Rockford and Lanphier High School in Springfield. Both gave out more suspensions and other forms of discipline to black students than their peers back in the 2024-25 school year. And that's despite the fact that black students did not make up the majority of the student population at either school. This is the result, I should say, of an investigation done by two Illinois public radio newsrooms. We're joined now by the two education reporters who looked into this to talk more about what they found. Emily Hayes is with Illinois Public Media. Peter Medlin is with Northern Public Radio. Both are partner stations, WILL and WNIJ. Emily, Peter, welcome back to the 21st Show.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for having us. Yeah.
And listeners, we want to hear from you. We are taking calls for the first part of the show today. So 800-222-9455 is the number. 800-222-9455. What is your experience with how schools handle discipline? What do you think is driving these disparities? And how should schools deal with disruptive students? Again, 800-222-9455. 800-222-9455. All right, Emily, I'm going to start with you. Tell me about Lanphier High in Springfield.
One thing that I just wanted to say is that actually I think black students were the majority at that school, but looking at statewide data as a whole, black students are disciplined more total across the state than white students, despite so many more white students across the state. But yeah, at Lanphier, Lanphier and Kennedy were those two outliers. One thing that is interesting about Lanphier High School and the Springfield School District is that it is under a 50-year consent decree, which started with desegregation and a lawsuit from a parent saying that there wasn't racial equity in the schools. And that has continued because the school district has never managed to do one part of the consent decree, which is hire as many minority teachers proportionate to the number of minority students.
So we'll come back to that. So you mentioned that the black students are the majority at Lanphier. So tell me about the student population.
Yeah, so slightly more black students than white students. It is higher degree of low-income students than the state as a whole. I think that is true for Kennedy and Rockford as well. So, you know, everyone knows that these are more common approaches and maybe needed more in low-income schools. Some people would say that there's rowdier behavior. But what we found is that these two schools resort to suspensions than way more than other schools in the state.
So, yeah, tell me what, so put some numbers on that. Quantify that for me.
You know, Peter can tell you more about Rockford, but Rockford, let's stick
with Lanphier.
Lanphier,
Then we'll go to,
Lanphier. So, in both cases, they are suspending black students more often than there are black students in the school. So even though it's a sort of small population of 482, there's almost 4 times that number of suspensions of black students.
All right, Peter, let me bring you into the conversation. Now tell me about Kennedy Middle School, just the overall.
Yeah, so Kennedy Middle School, like I mentioned, this is a middle school in Rockford, and this is a really low-income school, even compared to the district as a whole, which is a pretty low-income district. So this is like a school where over 90% of the students are low-income, It's also one of the schools in the district with the highest Black student population. So about 62% of Kennedy's students are Black, but also, like, again, as we're referring to with disproportionate discipline, they receive over 80% of the in-school suspensions. It adds up to basically 7 disciplinary actions per Black student. Actually, Emily put together this metric, right, that is literally Black student discipline rate. And not only did Kennedy have the highest rate in the state, it was actually basically twice as high as the second school on that list, which of course was Lanphier. So again, this is 236 Black students total at the school and over 1,600 discipline incidents, which for our data set includes in-school suspensions, out-of-school suspensions, and expulsions.
Do you understand what sort of incidents or allegations are prompting these kind of outcomes?
So at Kennedy, we do know there's basically 2 big categories that make this up. One of them is called violence without physical injury. And so again, it's a little bit vague. We know there is violence with injury, which I think we can maybe explain a little bit better. But again, so the vast majority are either violence without physical injury, or they get lumped into the category, of course, that is just called other things. So like we don't really know, we don't have good data on there. Again, we've got some like anecdotes from students about like, they might be interpreted to be like, oh, they're talking back to a teacher, or, maybe they're late for class a couple times, and eventually that builds up to earning them an in-school suspension. But again, they often get categorized in these categories that are a little bit vague, sometimes with violence without physical injury, but also like obviously other categories or other things is inherently vague.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Like violence with physical injury, that seems pretty intuitive, right? People get into a fight or you punch someone, they get hurt. I don't know. Violence without physical, is that like words are violence, or is it,
And we don't
just,
really know. Yeah, I
yeah.
guess teachers have a lot of discretion about what that is.
Emily, what about at Lanphier? Same question. Like, what do we understand or don't understand about what is actually prompting this disproportionate discipline?
It's the exact same situation where it's not tobacco. There's so little incidents on tobacco, alcohol, violence with physical injury that there's no data reported. There are just a few drug offenses, a few violence without injury, like 100, but then 2,000 in this other category. So similar to Rockford, where it's clear it's not these incidents that people might imagine when they hear suspensions. That's like, oh, there was violence or something. This is not violence. And looking into what could be causing this, I talked to an expert. One of the interesting things is that these suspension rates didn't start until desegregation. Black schools were not suspending Black students, but when Black students started entering white schools, the white schools responded with something that they were using some of suspensions, but then started treating Black student behavior, the same behavior, as worse. And we've kind of stuck with that pattern all this time.
Interesting. All right, let me take a moment to remind listeners this is the 21st show. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Emily Hayes, who's education reporter at our home station, Illinois Public Media, and Peter Medlin, education reporter at WNIJ, Northern Public Radio, based in DeKalb. They also cover Rockford and many other communities in northern Illinois. If you want to join us today, 800-222-9455. We're talking about their reporting looking at how Black students are disproportionately disciplined in schools, specifically through the lens of 2 cases where this is the data showed it was the most extreme. That's Kennedy Middle School in Rockford, Lanphier High School in Springfield. Again, if you want to join us, 800-222-9455. 800-222-9455. We asked members of our texting group what they thought about this. Got a variety of responses. Franny in Hinckley says, for 20 years, I worked in an elementary school with an enrollment that was roughly a third Black, a third white, and a third Hispanic. I thought the Hispanic kids and their parents were the most respectful. I don't remember the Black kids being that much more disruptive than the white kids. She says, behavior issues in the classroom are frustrating and bothersome. Classroom management needs more attention in getting that degree in education. In my experience, the teachers who treated their students respectfully had the fewest discipline problems, she says. Thanks for that message. We'll share some more messages as we go on. But again, if you want to join us, 800-222-9455. All right, Peter, you shared some tape. And this is a student, I should say the mom of student Victorious Batson, talking about how frequent in-school suspensions have affected her daughter.
My daughter's whole attitude changed. She used to be happy-go-lucky all the time, and when she went to that school, it is creating her to be upset, angry a lot.
So say more about that situation.
Yeah, so Victorious, she just finished seventh grade at Kennedy and says that she's, again, like a lot of black students at the school, has had a lot of in-school suspensions. She says, again, when we're talking about what category, like, okay, like what is she doing to earn this? She's like, yeah, sometimes it's, she's being interpreted as like talking back to a teacher or, sometimes being late to class or for things like that. And really kind of the story that she told us is that having all of these discipline incidents and being in school suspended all the time has really just like made her enjoy school a lot less. Like her mom kind of alluded to, like she was someone who really loved going to school, was really interested in learning before, but has had such a negative experience at her middle school. And, she just finished seventh grade. She's got a year left. And she's at the point where she's like, well, I don't think I'll be able to move schools. I would if I could, but now I kind of just have to wait it out until, I get to high school and hopefully things improve. But again, it's unfortunately another story of, these kind of discipline incidents really dampening a student's love for school and love for learning.
So you mentioned this is an in-school suspension. What happens during an in-school suspension for people who may not be familiar with that?
Right. So for people that don't know, right, like obviously out of school suspension, you have to, for 1 or 2 days or however it is, students are out of school. In school, you basically go to an in-school suspension room, and depending on the school and depending on the district, they might have like a teacher's aide in there. Some of them actually have like specific in-school suspension monitors. And so the idea is that they would go in there and, work on homework, work on classwork, even though again, like by nature of them being in school suspended, they are missing. They are literally not in their classroom during that. So the idea is that they would, work on classwork. Sometimes they receive help from those in-school suspension monitors, or if there's a teacher's aide in there, sometimes they, like the folks in Rockford say that they try to have someone in there to provide some kind of like reflection work to be like, okay, here's how you ended up here. Here's how we can improve the discipline. Victorious, though, was telling us that like that doesn't really happen, at least in her experience. She felt like they kind of just get tossed in there and say, do your work, get on your Chromebook. She was also like, it's cold, the room's uncomfortable, the food's bad, all that type of stuff too. But that's generally what an in-school suspension is. And like, at some schools, you might be in school suspended for the full day or for multiple days. Or if there's an incident with like related to certain classes or certain teachers, you might get in school suspended for multiple, like smaller chunks of multiple days.
All right, let's go to the phones at 800-222-9455. We have Maurice calling from DeKalb on line 1. Maurice, thanks for calling in.
Yeah, thank you for letting me join the conversation. I serve as an elementary school principal at a pretty diverse building. And I will say in my years of experience, one of the things that I've noticed is that oftentimes with black students, that negative behavior is perceived as innate or part of their actual character, whereas with white students, that behavior is perceived as coming from an outside factor. So, for example, maybe they're going through something, parents are, splitting, something like that. And I think, that there has to be room for, again, that conversation on being trauma-informed, understanding that trauma is negatively impacting communities of color in our country, certainly in the DeKalb and Rockford area throughout the state of Illinois, as well as students from low income, right? So that trauma shows up, and how can we be responsive to that? Consequences are necessary, but suspension can't be our only answer.
That's interesting, Maurice. So it sounds like what I'm hearing from you is, a teacher might say to a white student, hey, what's going on? Are you okay? And say to the black student, go to the principal's office right away, right?
Yes.
How do you work through that as a school administrator?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we try to do for sure is build out those skills for our teachers, build out some of that opportunity as well to be reflective. We've, regularly look at that data to be able to say, hey, notice who is getting in trouble in your classroom. Is there something we can change on the front end, right, that is going to help to reduce some of these behaviors? So I think reviewing that data together, being reflective, and then building as well those skills to be able to handle some of those things inside of the classroom in a more culturally responsive way are things that we try to do in the school system.
Maurice, thank you so much for calling in to share your experience. Really appreciate that. If you want to join us today, 800-222-9455 is the number. We're on this topic for about another 20 minutes. We'll have some more text messages to share as well when we return. We're talking today about disproportionate discipline for black students as opposed to their white peers, particularly through the lens of two schools that our guests studied in some detail, Kennedy Middle School in Rockford and Lanphier High School in Springfield. We're talking with Emily Hayes and Peter Medlin, two education reporters here in Illinois. Again, if you want to join us, 800-222-9455. This is the 21st show. We'll be right back. It's the 21st show. I'm Brian Mackey. We are talking today about student discipline, particularly how black students are disciplined with things like in-school or out-of-school suspensions at much higher rates than would be expected based on their share of the population. And we're talking with Peter Medlin of WNIJ, Northern Public Radio, and Emily Hayes of WILL, Illinois Public Media, who spent some time looking into this, particularly through the lens of two outlier schools, Kennedy Middle School in Rockford and Lanphier High School in Springfield. 800-222-9455 if you want to join us today. 800-222-9455. And Peter, let me come back to you, because one of the things I think Maurice said was that struck me there was, like, it's one thing if this is an individual teacher, maybe handling, approaching students differently, as he said. And I should say, if people are just joining us, we had a caller who said he was an elementary school principal just before the break. And, maybe some teachers would give the benefit of the doubt, you might say, to white students and assume that there was something going on in their lives causing disruptive behavior, whereas black students maybe don't get that benefit of the doubt. That's an individual choice. It seems like what you and Emily have been reporting on are more systemic policies to just use these sort of disciplinary measures much more rapidly or broadly, or however you want to say it. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, they're at the top of the state when it comes to, and again, our metrics that we were using for school discipline, we're looking at expulsions as well as in-school suspensions and out-of-school suspensions. And at Rockford, one of the arguments that they made to me actually was that how things are now is a great improvement from what they were, because they used to give out way more out of school suspensions, and they've kind of shifted towards more in-school suspensions. And so again, the idea is that in-school suspensions are a better option. We actually found some research that suggests that that's likely, but that's not necessarily the case, that like the academic impact of in-school suspensions are maybe more severe than originally assumed, that even just getting one or two of those can really impact you academically. But also the case, like, they are still giving out a lot of in-school and out of school, particularly because when we're talking about Kennedy Middle School, like, this is a really small middle school. So even though when you're looking at the top schools for discipline, there might be some schools that have a lot more out of school suspensions, like those schools are also like 2 or 3 times larger than Kennedy too. But yeah, this is like all the way across it. And again, like, it's not even something that so Kennedy obviously is an outlier, but it's also something that the district as a whole relies on, specifically when we're talking about in-school suspensions, right? Like, if you look at the top middle schools in the state for these school discipline metrics, all 5 are 5 of the 6 Rockford middle schools. So this is really kind of a direction that the district has gone and tried to utilize, again, with the idea being that they are trying to reduce out of school by shifting to in school, But again, like that's not as clean as maybe they'd hoped.
I want to share another message we got from a listener. Did not give their name. This was a text message. It says, I've worked in Decatur Public Schools and currently Champaign Unit 4. Both districts approach discipline differently, but very similar in size. I'm in my 20th year teaching. I'm a music teacher, so I'm considered the fun space in elementary and middle school. Generally, kids want to stay. Behavior, she says, or he says, is an indicator of something else going on. Some children come in a little feral. We don't require kindergarten or pre-K in the state of Illinois. Some children learn how to behave in a school setting. But also, kids act up in school because it's the safest place to make a mistake. This person says some of the behaviors I experienced in a classroom, biting, hitting, running, chair throwing, fighting, they feel unreal when you're experiencing it. This person says, in my experience, the poor delivery of discipline comes from inexperienced administrators who do not culturally know or understand the families in their school. Sometimes it's from an admin who doesn't know how to discipline, so they suspend instead. Knowing the community makes a difference as well. Those who fail are often outsiders, failing to make connections. This person continues, there are great admins out there, and the ones who recognize children need a safe space before they can learn. I work with one in Garden Hills who's now in Brookfield. She created a calm baseline and space to help students understand the why of their reactions and behavior. If we do not teach children how to manage emotions, we won't have adults who can either. And with that, let's go back to the phones. We have Marvin calling from Springfield on line 1. Marvin, thank you for calling in.
Hey, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. So I understand you actually work with some of the kids we might be talking about today.
Yeah, I have the opportunity to work with some of those kids that have gone to Lanphier, and because of the excessive suspensions and disciplinary actions, they were sent to alternative schools. And so I've worked and I've had the opportunity to do some therapy with those kids. And what I recognize is a lot of the pressure is being placed on the school and the system to inform the teachers and expecting the system to change. When in essence, I think there also needs to be resources dedicated on the back end, because after those kids got suspended and sent to alternative schools, there's still not a lot of support to help them learn behavioral management and all the skills necessary to not only function in school, but function in life.
Marvin, thanks so much for sharing those thoughts. I really appreciate it. Emily, I wonder what you heard from, I don't know if you can respond to what Marvin said or anything else,
yes,
or just what you heard from Lanphier as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the principal of Lanphier, I talked to her and she's like, all the kids know I love them, whether they've been suspended or not. And she had a background in restorative justice, which is, the idea is you talk out and fix the problem instead of just punishing kids, and that the district has been shifting more to that. And she was saying, hopefully, we'll see better data this year. She's seeing better data so far. But everything that the callers have said is so, similar to what the expert I talked to said. And that, when you have, there's a lot of debate around school resource officers, having police officers in schools. Most schools, I cover in depth have them. And they do result in more, interactions between students and law enforcement, like, arrests or the getting into the legal system. Versus if you have more school psychologists and school counselors, that, the expert said is an indicator that the school will have lower suspensions rates because they're supporting students that way. So I what the caller said about having more support for the students is definitely true according to the expert I talked to.
I want to share another couple of messages we got in. One person just said, Anthony in Chicago, correlation doesn't equal causation. And somebody else expounded on that a little bit, I think, in an email. John from Urbana says, maybe you should consider that black students are disciplined at a disproportionate rate because black students are disproportionately disruptive in the classroom. When a 14 and 16-year-old were out late last week, allegedly killing and critically wounding two of their peers, and I'll just say as an aside, he's referring to a shooting that took place in Urbana last week, John continues, there appears to have been a lack of supervision in the homes. Teachers and school administrators can't solve all of society's problems. Some problems must be solved in the home. And Peter, I wonder if that's something you heard through your reporting on this, that sort of sentiment.
Not necessarily. Again, we were talking to a lot of like families involved, and we definitely didn't hear that from school administrators. School administrators didn't say anything like, "Oh, well, black students are receiving more discipline because they're having more, action that merits it." That's not something that we heard from the school district or administrators or parents at all.
But I did hear, I talked to a student at Lanphier and his grandfather had that approach. He's like, yeah, what if these are just students who are, and the grandfather was black, by the way. He was like, yeah, I think that students need to be disciplined more. He's a bus driver, and he was like, you would be so shocked by like what the middle schoolers are saying. And, it's definitely, and if you look on Facebook on about news, like there was a assistant principal who allegedly assaulted a student and punched in school, and a lot of the Facebook comments were very empathetic towards the assistant principal, saying like, oh, everything that he's been through. Oh, he was injured by a student in the past, that sort of thing. So it's definitely a attitude that a lot of people have, and I think could be part of, when you see like they need consequences, they need punishment, then the response is punishment. But there are other ways to do this, and another school that I focused on had a really it was the opposite end of the data. This is a Chicago high school with 2,000 students, almost all black, and they have very, very few suspensions. It's about 50% poverty rate, so it's not as high as Lanphier or the Rockford school, but their approach is they solve problems before they get started, and the principals, the assistant principals, the teachers are all so there for the students, and the students say they feel like they're treated like humans more than other schools.
Yeah, well, okay, so let's get into the solutions part of this conversation then. So this is Kenwood in Chicago. We shared some audio with us. This is a student, Rihanna Crane, talking about comparing the experience at Kenwood to her previous school.
Instead of just throwing the bad people away, we fix it. Like, we fix what's going on, we talk about what's going on, and we resolve it.
So tell me more about what's going on at Kenwood that's different from places that are, handing out suspensions like candy.
Yeah, so I think Rihanna Crane is such a good person to talk about this because she was at a different school, I think, last year. And then, this school year, she was at Kenwood. In the previous school, she had gotten into this fight. She did really well academically, but her friends were this conflict-prone group, and her mom warned her to stay away from them, but she was like, they're my friends, And so they kept getting into conflicts with upperclassmen, and then the upperclassmen responded by targeting her specifically. And she would go to the office and try to talk to the counselors and administrators and say, like, they're targeting me, they keep antagonizing me, can you do something about it? And they were like, okay, we got to talk about this later, we don't have time right now, we'll talk about this later. And they kept pushing it off, and eventually she goes into the office and says, like, there is not going to be a later, this is going to happen right now. And they were like, no, we'll talk about it later. And before that later happened, the upperclassmen jumped her, and she said they stomped her head and she was physically injured. But the administration responded by suspending everybody involved in the fight, and she says she was suspended for 2 to 3 days, and her mom talked with me a little bit about this as well. So that's one example of how a school can respond. From her perspective, she just wasn't listened to. But then she came to Kenwood, and she saw how quickly administrators listen, and they because they had heard she had been in this fight, they had a plan for her as soon as she got started of how are we going to make sure this doesn't happen. And then another student at Kenwood was like, and the exact same situation was starting with me at Kenwood. He's a young man named Theo Andrew, and he was like, there was an upperclassman who was disrespecting me in front of everyone, and I really didn't want to have that. But he also, Kenwood has tons of opportunities. He was in chorus, he's in all of these extracurriculars, and he didn't want to lose any of that. So he went to the principal's office and, told Principal Calloway, her name is, and he was like, this is what's going to happen. Like, I really need you to help me, or like something's going to go down. And the principal was like, okay, sit in my office and I'm going to go find this upperclassman and we'll talk it out. And she spent 4 periods trying to find this upperclassman, and she was that committed to solving this problem. And I talked to a bunch of students at Kenwood, and they all said that the administrators, you can talk to anybody, you have a problem coming up, the administrators will counsel you through it and solve it. And so they all said, like, we don't have that many class clowns because we're also invested in our opportunities, that nobody like really gives the class clowns the time of the day. And then they also, don't get to the point where anybody needs to be suspended. I mean, there are a few cases, but because people are just so, the problems are solved so early.
Yeah, deep.
Brian, can I jump in really quick on that?
Sure, go ahead. In just a couple of minutes, I should
we're-
say, before we need to wrap up. But go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, but it's like when we're talking about solutions again, and the idea that no, people aren't advocating for even the students that we talk to at Kennedy and Rockford are not saying like, oh, this is unfair and therefore there should be no discipline that happens at all, right? Like they were saying that not only are in-school suspensions unfairly given to them, but they also get given to students who have actual misbehavior, but it doesn't deter those students. It's just it's always just they go back to the in-school suspension and then they go back and do it again and again and again. And that's something that the data and the research actually backs up, right? That in school, these exclusionary discipline procedures don't really deter students from the misbehavior, which again, if you're doing discipline, it's not just to be a punishment. The idea is that it's so that they don't do it again, but that's not really the results that we see.
And briefly, can you talk about Brothers for Change, Sisters for Change, Peter?
Yeah, so this is one of the ways that Rockford is hoping to try to change things, and the way they're doing it is this mentorship program that is really led by Black teachers and Black leaders in the district, trying to build relationships with students, trying to help those students build relationships with their school, kind of like what Emily was referring to about all the opportunities, right? Like getting involved in sports, getting involved with chorus or a club or something like that. Also connecting with teachers, because again, it is the reality that a school like Kennedy, over 60% of the students are Black, less than 7% of teachers are. And so, again, in some of these ways that behavior of Black students can be misinterpreted or interpreted as misbehavior, trying to bridge those cultural gaps a little bit to have some understanding. That's the idea. It's a pretty new program. They're trying to expand it out, so we'll see how it goes.
Peter Medlin with Northern Public Radio and Emily Hayes with Illinois Public Media. Thanks for sharing your reporting with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we will have links to their coverage if you want to go deeper on these stories at our website, 21stshow.org. We'll also have links to some other stories. This is an ongoing issue. People have been reporting on this for years. We'll have that all again at our website, 21stshow.org. Coming up after the break, we're going to be talking about technology at the World Cup that started in Illinois. This is the 21st Show.